Hey guys, welcome to Living in the Aftermath. This is Lyndsey, your weekly trauma host, and this week we are joined by Lynn Stroud. She applied to be on my podcast through my guest interest forum, and I am so excited to talk to her because she has been through so many layers and levels of abuse and trauma that I think are so complicated and not spoken about. And so I'm so excited to have a conversation with you, learn more about your story, and ask you questions, and hopefully just bring some context to things that I think people that normally don't experience trauma just really can't understand. So thank you so much for taking the time and talking to me today.
Thank you. I'm so incredibly excited to be a guest on the show and share my experiences.
I can't wait. So, as you know, going through trauma in general makes people just kind of uncomfortable. I think I have found the more that you try and talk about trauma, I think people shut down the conversation because they find it really hard to comprehend and understand. And I think even people that have been through abuse and trauma have a really hard time identifying it. And then I think there's a lot of judgment for how long people stay in trauma, right? I know that I still get a lot of judgment for the choices that I made, even though I stayed with my abuser for 18 years. I think there's judgment if you leave too soon and you didn't try hard enough, or if you stayed too long, then well, how didn't you know? So why don't you give us a little backstory and context on your trauma that you've experienced and share as much detail as you feel comfortable?
Sure. So my story of trauma, I think, is really more like a lifetime of trauma. So the first, I want to say, experience that I ever had. Well, actually, this is interesting. I was actually thinking about this the other day. I always talk about the first experience that I ever had with a man that I felt was really, really traumatic for me. And it happened at the age of 12. And so I was walking in a park in my town, and I was walking to, I believe it was cross country running practice, and a bunch of boys were coming down the hill. They were probably around 15 or 16 years old, and they were football players from my school. And a bunch of them were laughing, and I really didn't think anything of it. And then one of them screamed out at me, "Hey, how old are you?" And I said 12. And he said, "Do you put out?" And I just remember being so incredibly shocked and taken back that I just froze. I just stood
Absolutely.
there looking confused. Later on, I found out that they were actually friends of my brother's. I had an older brother and they were teammates of his. And when I asked my brother later on at night at the dinner table if he figured out who the person was who said that to me, he basically told me to keep my mouth shut about it. He didn't want my
No.
parents to find out, and he didn't want me to say anything.
Er-
I really thought it seemed like it was a two-part thing. It seemed like part of it was that maybe he wanted to handle it on his own and not get adults involved. But the other part was that he was silencing me. He didn't want to bring adults into an uncomfortable situation and make things more uncomfortable, I think, for himself. I
Yeah.
don't really feel like he had my feelings prioritized at the moment.
How old was he at the time?
I think he was about 15.
Okay. So both of you are early teens trying to figure life out in general, but that had to feel so crappy at such a young age.
It really did. My brother and I were very close for many years, but we are no longer in contact. And that's because of me. I'm the one that went no contact with him. And I think it was almost kind of a warning sign of things to come, because I noticed that in the last several years, I actually disclosed to him that I was sexually assaulted many years ago in a relationship. And I found out that he was actually friendly with the person that sexually assaulted me. So he apparently stayed friends with one of my ex-boyfriends after I broke up with him. And I found this out years later.
No.
And so his response, though, was really, really aggressive. And instead of saying, I support you, I'm going to cut this guy off, it was more like, why are you doing this to me? Why are
Yeah.
you ruining my life? Now I have to give up a friend or, a coworker. It was really, really upsetting. And then he went to my mother and told my mother that he thought that I was lying, that my story didn't make any sense. And so that was the day that I officially went no contact with my brother. That was a couple years ago, and we have not spoken since.
I'm so sorry and so proud of you for making that decision. I think that as someone who has been through trauma and have had to cut people out of my life, that decision is not easy, especially when I think that you kind of develop I know it's not super healthy to have attachment issues and abandonment issues, but I think it's also really hard not to have them when you've gone through as much severe trauma as people like you and I have gone through. I mean, clearly, I don't know all of your story, but I have heard some of your clips on social media. And so I think that that's something that I think a lot of people overlook and don't realize that that is a really hard decision. And so I'm really proud of you for understanding your boundaries enough to make that decision.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. That really means a lot. A lot of people don't quite understand it when I say that I'm no contact with a member of my family. I think, you always get, you were talking about those really toxic statements that people give off when they hear about trauma because it makes them so uncomfortable, like marriage is hard or blood is thicker than water. And those are incredibly, incredibly insensitive things to say to a victim of abuse. And if you are saying those things, I encourage you to really stop because you're doing the victim a disservice.
Well, especially when no one is going to have full context of your life and what you've lived, even if it's someone that is a close friend or a family member or whatever, they're not going to understand the dynamic of each individual relationship that you have. I've heard a lot of people talk recently about how even growing up as a child, each child will experience different versions of their parents based on their personal interactions with them. And so then when they grow up and they're like, this was my interaction with my parents, this other sibling can be so confused because their experience with them can be the polar opposite. And so I think someone saying, blood is thicker than water, well, how do they know all of the things that have led you to that decision and the things like that's a hard decision to make. And so to say that without understanding the context, I agree, is horrible and hurtful and completely dismissive to your own personal experience. And I think for me, I really believed in trauma that setting boundaries was disrespectful. And I think that this just kind of amplifies that. It makes it so you feel like you can't because it's disrespectful if you set a boundary for yourself and you're not caring about your family members, when in reality, your only goal should be caring about yourself.
Absolutely. That's so well said. It
Thank
really
you.
is. And and I do agree with that. I do feel like different children in the household really do have different experiences. For me, I was the youngest of 4 children. And I think culturally, the way that I was raised, I think there was always this idea that I was the baby and that I needed protection, that I needed to be looked after. And that same brother that I don't have contact with now, um, he sort of took that on full force. I mean, at first, the way that I framed it in my head was, well, this is what people do when they love you. They look out for you. But
Yeah.
his behavior almost bordered on that of like a jealous boyfriend. When I started to grow up, when my body started to change around age 13 or 14, he became so incredibly overprotective. Like the fact that I couldn't even talk to a boy, the fact that he would constantly try to beat up boys or intimidate boys who were speaking to me, that he would make comments about what that I was wearing. And it was nothing inappropriate. It was nothing
Yeah.
different than what, a 13-year-old
Yeah.
girl of the time would be wearing. And so I think so many things have shaped the abuse that I stepped into in relationships. It was, growing up in kind of a controlling and sheltered kind of position in my household. I think it was these cultural aspects. I think it was where I grew up. I'm in Central Texas now, but I grew up in Northern New Jersey. It was and possibly still is there's a lot of toxic masculinity, I think, tied into just not only growing up in that area, but if you're part of a certain cultural group, there's just a lot of this really aggressive masculine behavior. And so I think I was subjected to that from such a young age that growing up, when I started to see these red flags from men who would become extremely jealous and controlling and, were trying to intimidate me and insult me and eventually put their hands on me, I really didn't know what to do with it.
Yeah.
It was
One
so
thing that
confusing for me.
I'm curious about, so you said you're the youngest. I'm the oldest of 4 children. And I think that led me to kind of always feeling like I had to make the right decision and feel like I needed to know what I was doing. And I was kind of the rebellious child. I definitely don't feel like I'm understood by my family by any means. And I'm curious, you kind of, the way that you explain your role in the family kind of makes me wonder if you went into your early adulthood questioning your own ability to make choices and protect yourself because of the role that everyone else had put you in as the baby of the family, where you didn't need them, but needed those people to guide you and protect you and never gave you that confidence in yourself.
100%.
See, and
Absolutely.
that's so interesting to me, and I'm looking at my children now, I'm hoping that I'm not doing the same thing to them. I want them to have the confidence to make their own choices, and I think birth order does play a lot into how we do things and how we show up in the world. One other thing that I wondered about, so I was raised in a very religious area of where I live. Toxic masculinity was something that is extremely heavy here. And a lot of people that I am friends with have been through very severe trauma and abuse because of certain things that the church has taught. And so it's interesting to me that even in New Jersey, across the country, it's similar things happening. And I do wonder what creates that environment for men and what creates that dynamic so consistently across the board.
I think it's so many things. I think religion does play a part. I grew up Catholic, and I wouldn't say that we were ever hardcore Catholics, but it was more of a tradition thing in my family. And so the area that I was raised in was very Italian American, strong Italian influences. And so in those families, I don't know if it's still that way, but decades ago, you did get a lot of controlling behavior from the father in the family. If there were older brothers, they were taught to look out for their younger sisters and in a very aggressive way.
I
And
see
so I
that.
think young women, a lot of us who were raised in these areas, I think we felt like we really didn't have the power to make our own decisions. And if we did, they were always questioned.
Mhm.
And then when you grow
Yep.
up with thinking that, it's so hard for you to make a final decision about something. I felt like even when I left relationships, if they would get to a point where I was just like, I have had it. This is too toxic. This is abusive and I don't deserve it. And I would leave the relationship. I almost felt like I didn't have a support system to go to because either
Mhm.
my family wasn't physically around or, they didn't completely understand what was going on in the relationship. And they didn't seem to want to take enough of my word to trust me that something felt really off, that the things that were going on were inappropriate. And no matter how I explained it, it seemed to be sort of shrugged off. And so, of course, I would get into this cycle where I would break up with someone and then they would stalk me. They would stay outside my house. They would call my phone incessantly, usually in the middle of the night, a lot of times inebriated. They would, go to my friends. They would appeal to my family and they would inflict this guilt, and I would feel like I had no choice but to get back together with them. And it happened over and over and over again with multiple people.
Which I feel like I've had a really hard time lately because I have a lot of people ask me all the time, what would you recommend after leaving a toxic relationship or an abusive relationship? And I think the thing that I have come to the conclusion of is I would say isolate yourself from everyone around you until you trust your own voice. And I think I have felt really guilty saying that just because I think isolation in general is not a good thing. And especially because toxic or abusive relationships are typically you are isolated from everyone around you. But because in these relationships or situations, you are conditioned to question every thought and action and decision that you make, I think it's almost crucial to where you don't have someone on the outside saying, this is what you should do, or this is the decision you should make until you are so solid in your own decisions, because it can be so much more confusing and lead you back into such a negative situation without you even seeing that it's happening.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I had a lot of friends around me at the time, and I trusted their word, sometimes more than my own inner voice. And those friends really led me down a very dangerous path.
Yes, I'm sure that was not the intention or what they had planned, but I don't know why I feel so guilty saying it. I think maybe because I just remember how crappy it felt feeling so isolated from the world in my relationship. And so I think to give that advice feels really crappy because I know community and having a really strong core people around you is so important, because I know that now because I have that, right? But I had to build that. And so I think maybe that's why I feel guilty is just because I know how crappy that does feel. But I do think that that's an extremely crucial part in getting out of these relationships. So you said as you were leaving these relationships, it sounds like that's kind of a consistent thing, even as you brought your sexual assault to your brother, that he kind of dismissed it and didn't believe what you were saying, which is heartbreaking. And I think so many victims of all kinds of abuse suffer from that.
Yeah, I think so. I started a relationship with someone when I was about 20 years old, and he was older than I was. He was 27. And I had just left a relationship that was incredibly tumultuous, toxic, and abusive. And I thought that dating someone older would mean that he would be more mature and that he was settled somewhat in life, at least settled in a career, knew what he wanted, knew how to, respect a woman. I couldn't have been more wrong. I think that relationship more than any other was kind of a turning point in my life. And it's so interesting because I think it's refreshing to see that as time goes on, we're gaining a better vocabulary on what is happening to us, what's happening to victims. Because this happened to me over 25 years ago when I was in that relationship with that older man. He reproductively coerced me. Now, at the time, I don't even think that term existed over 25 years
No,
ago.
no.
But if I would have explained to someone what happened, I think they probably just would have told me that it was like a misunderstanding or that it was a mistake.
Exactly, and dismissed it. Can you give a little context of maybe how that relationship looked in the beginning and what made you feel like this was a good relationship for you?
Sure, sure. I actually was introduced to him through a friend of mine. We're no longer friends. And I think that to me was a sign that he was somewhat vetted. Like, I can trust this person because it's not a random guy that I met at a bar, or this is a friend of a friend. So clearly they're passing off a good recommendation. So she was dating his brother, his younger brother. And he and I started dating. And at first, I thought that he was really nice. I thought that he was incredibly funny and charming. I started to see the red flags a few months in. He was incredibly jealous. He was controlling. He was intimidating. If I said something that he wasn't comfortable with, he would immediately shame me about it. And one of those things was, and I find this so interesting that men today are so focused on this, body count. He interrogated me to try to find out how many men I had slept with. And first of all, it's none of his business and he doesn't need an answer to it. And when I finally told him a number, he then called me a slut. Um, when I told him some of the ethnicities of the men that I had been in relationships with, he said, "That's disgusting." So clearly he was racist. Um,
Absolutely.
yeah, and he had a particular issue, and I cannot tell you what this particular issue is because he was Latino. So I
Yeah.
found it so interesting that he thought that it was so inappropriate that I had had these relationships or that these relationships even exist. He
Yeah.
had such a problem inherently with Black men being with white women. And to this day, I cannot tell you where that comes from because he had Black
That is
people in his
bizarre.
family. I would go to like barbecues and it would be a little mix of everyone, white people, Hispanic people, Black people. It to me seemed normal. He had an issue with it. And he shamed me about that. Everything, honestly, that he could, if he also, I realized, came from a very abusive family, and his mother and father were very narcissistic and abusive. So his mother would constantly make comments about my appearance, about my body, his father as well. And he was like that. He would constantly make, comments about my appearance, about my body. And, the sad thing about it is that at this point in my life, I was working out so heavily. I mean, I was probably, 20 years old. I mean, I was at the gym like 7 days a week.
Yeah.
I would, make my appearance a priority because I used to be a singer years ago. And, that sadly was a big part of,
Yeah.
being in a girls group. But yeah, I was constantly, exercising, killing myself and engaging in these behaviors like, limiting food intake and, like bordering on anorexic was
Yeah.
and it was all to try to get to this ideal physical ideal that I had in my head that was being upheld by men and women around me.
Yeah.
But
And did you say that you were in a really tumultuous relationship prior to him?
yes.
So do you
Yes.
feel like that almost made you dismiss some of his things and be like, "Okay, well, it's not this," and so you overlooked them?
Absolutely. And that happened to me multiple times in life, honestly. I had the first boyfriend that I dated when I was maybe around 18, and we were the same age. And this is not to excuse his behavior in any way, but he was also going through a lot of stuff with his parents. And so I feel like there was a bleed off in a lot of these relationships. And I noticed that the parents were so toxic and narcissistic and abusive that it was almost like the children seemed to go one way or the other. You either
Yeah.
end up with a child that is, completely insecure and narcissistic and wants to destroy everyone around them, or you end up with someone, it seems, who is, very withdrawn and depressed and has low self-esteem as well. So it's like it almost seems like it can go one or two ways. I think what I admired in them in all of these men at first was their confidence. And I thought, oh, this man is so confident and really it was a front for something else. It was a facade that they were putting on so that they could appeal to the opposite sex, and really it was just to cover up how deeply they hated themselves.
Yeah. You fell in love with the potential they presented you.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah, but every relationship I was in, I think I said to myself, okay, well, maybe that's something uncomfortable that he did today. Maybe it made me feel really uneasy, but at least it wasn't this. At least he didn't blatantly insult my appearance. At least he didn't, body shame me or body count shame me. And that's such a toxic, that's such a terrible
A
way to look
sad
at
bar
things.
to have.
It is, it is. I held the bar so low for so many years that, like, I almost wanna kick myself for just
Feel that. Like, the old me, I feel so sad for that girl because the things that when I go and I talk about my story and I say the things that happened, I'm like, "Ugh." I see the look on people's faces where because I let my husband date other women in our marriage, and he came back and was like, "I'm not physically attracted to you, but I know you're gonna take care of me the best." And I just completely overlooked it, and all of these things now that I say out loud and make me feel physically ill. That was something that I was like, "Oh my gosh, I'm so in love with you. Let me spend my whole life with you." How did those things live together in my brain, and how was I so solid in that relationship? And I think giving myself grace in that time of my life is so hard even still. Even though I know I didn't know what I know now, I still think that's something I struggle with.
Yeah, I completely understand that. The things that we let go, I think in the sake of what we think is love at the
Yeah.
time. And really a lot of times it's just other things. It's comfort, it's not wanting to be alone, it's complacency, it's the fact that we tell ourselves that we don't deserve more or that we've been told our
Absolutely.
whole lives that we don't deserve more, and we do. We
Well,
absolutely do.
and the thing that I think is so interesting is the way that they tell us that we don't deserve more is so subtle and discreet that it doesn't ever feel like it's that. It just comes across a way that makes you question every part of yourself. And like one of the things that I talk about, I was told my whole life growing up that if I talked less, I would get in trouble less, which fair. I talk a lot and that's fine. But my abuser caught that. Like he heard my dad say that to me one time, and then as we got married, he would say, maybe you shouldn't talk in public. I know you don't want to sound stupid when you talk. And so maybe just don't talk when we're out. I'll talk for us. And it came across as him trying to protect me, but internally it made me question my own voice and the things that I had to say and how I presented in public to people. I absolutely do not want to sound stupid or come across uneducated or like I should not be speaking to people. And so I think the way that they make us question ourselves and our ability to do things without them is so creative and subtle that there is no way for us to even sit here and come up with all the ways that someone does it.
Yes. It's incredibly nuanced. and it's gonna show up. And this is something I wanna share just for your listeners. The way that one of my boyfriends reproductively coerced me was so hard for me to pinpoint at the time, and the reason why is because the sex started consensually. But here's the thing that everyone needs to know. An agreement to sex is not an agreement to pregnancy, ever. And just because you initially agree to sex doesn't mean that you cannot stop at any
Yes.
point in the sex. You can say, "No, I don't wanna do this anymore." You can say, "Stop," but what happened to me specifically was that, I had a snafu with my birth control. I was on the pill for many years, and my doctor put me on a patch that was available at the time, and the patch came off in the ocean because I went on vacation, and so when I came back to speak to my partner about it, I said, "Look, I'm not the patch didn't work. We need to figure out what we're going to do." And one of the things that kind of sticks in my memory very strongly is that, excuse me, is that boyfriend from the beginning of the relationship never wanted to use condoms. There was always an excuse that he can't stay erect with them on, that he can't feel anything, I should be able to trust him because he really loves me. So we don't need the condom. There was an excuse after excuse. So when it came down to us deciding what we were going to do, I said, "Should we use a condom?" And he said, "Well, no, I'll just make sure that I pull out." Well, I'm reminding him during the sex, mind you, a 20-year-old girl reminding a 27-year-old man in the middle of sex, "Don't forget, you said you'd pull out. Don't forget, don't forget."
Yeah.
And we come to the end of it, and he does not pull out. Now, I have a feeling there's going to be some people that listen to this that say, "Oh, it was a mistake. It was
He
a
got caught up in the moment.
it was an accident. It was an
Vomit.
accident. Whoops, he was drinking. Whoops, he couldn't pull out fast enough." Men can always pull out. That is, and I will say this even more so, do not trust a man to pull out. Don't even put that trust out into the ether.
Well,
Protect
and
yourself. I did, and I
yes.
regret it.
Well, and one thing that I think I will say, and I might cry talking about this, when you talked about being able to stop sex at any time. That was something that was really scary for me when I got into my new relationship because that had not been something that had been received well in my previous relationship. If I didn't feel well, it was because I didn't love him or what. There were all these reasons that I was guilted into having sex with him for extended periods of time. And if I did say no or stop it, it was either physical abuse or all of the manipulation that would come and make me feel like absolute crap. Or you've given me blue balls and it hurts so physically bad that how dare you do this to me? I swear if I had heard that word one more time after that last year that I was with my abuser, I was ready to cut my own eardrums out. Cuz I had done something wrong and I felt like I was so scared when I got with my husband now. I met him about 2 years after I left my abuser. So I had a decent amount of time in therapy where I had talked about all of these things and how it was going to look when I got with a new partner. When it came to implementing those things, here I go, I'm going to cry. I did not believe that a man could meet me with such compassion and understanding in a moment like that. I have not one time felt pressured or like I did not have a voice or a say in every part of what is happening with my new husband. And I didn't believe that that was real life prior to meeting him. And I think that I really, really, really want young women to understand because in my first marriage, I did believe that I was such an asshole for hurting him or doing something wrong or saying the wrong thing and ruining this moment and whatever the reason was, right? None of those things are real. A man can control himself in that moment just as much as you can control yourself in that moment. And no one should make you feel guilty for saying no and stopping it in the middle. No matter what your reason is, you are always in control of your body. And if someone makes you feel any other way, then you shouldn't be doing whatever you're doing with them. And so I think that's such a beautiful thing to point out. And I appreciate you being so vulnerable to share that because I do agree that is so complicated to pinpoint. And I hate that people come up with all those justifications because none of that is real.
Yeah. I'm so happy to hear that you are in a healthy relationship now.
Thank you.
I'm in the same boat. I'm currently married, and My husband is wonderful. He's supportive. When I started doing these podcast guest spots, I thought that he might be uncomfortable with me sharing what happened to me. He's like my biggest supporter.
Same.
He
And I think
shares
that,
these with his friends, and
yes,
yeah, he's so wonderful. And I thought, honestly, when I left my first marriage, which was so incredibly abusive, I thought I had this terrible fear that my life was over. And I was
hmm
only 36. That's like
I was
when your life should be
35.
starting,
I
right?
was 35. I had 3 kids. I was like, no one's going to want to be with me. I'm single forever. It's totally
Right.
fine.
Me too. I was 36 years old with an 11-month-old baby, and I was like, no
Yes.
one is going to want to date a single mom with a baby. Like, okay, I will just focus on my career and it's going to be okay. And then there he was, and I was like, I don't know, dude.
Well, another thing that I want to point out too, because my husband is the same exact way. I talk about very vulnerable things, things that are not comfortable, right? And I share things even about our relationship that are very vulnerable. And he is always my biggest cheerleader. And I didn't believe that was real. I always had this sense of competition in my previous relationship to where if I did anything that was good or brought me attention, he always had to make me feel bad about something else or bring me down. So he was always the one that was getting the most attention. And I think that I really want people to understand that that is not real in a relationship either. Like, it is okay for both people to be successful and cheer another person on. And that is how it should feel in a relationship all of the time. I think that's why I get so triggered by the phrase marriage is hard, because I don't believe that. Now that I am in the marriage that I'm in, marriage has not been hard one day. Life has been hard multiple days. There are a lot of hard things that we face all the time, but he has never felt hard. And the way that we communicate has never felt hard. And so I think phrases like that are so detrimental because then it does lead people to excuse things that they probably shouldn't.
Absolutely. Absolutely. When I was married to my ex-husband, there were so many red flags in the beginning, and then it got worse and worse and worse. And I think what finally made me sort of make the decision that like I cannot live like this anymore was having my daughter. I was kind of looking at her going, she doesn't need me. She doesn't need to see me being treated this way. She needs to see her mother being treated well and being respected and supported. She doesn't need to hear her father screaming obscenities at her mother, while she's nursing. She doesn't need to witness those kinds of things. But when I finally did get up the strength to call the police, that was the response that I got from the police officer that visited my house. And I was like, look, he is threatening to spit in my face. He is cursing at me while I'm nursing this baby. He is, clenching his fist and kind of bucking at me. And the cop's response was, but he never actually hit you. But he never actually spit at you. And I was like, well, no, but I don't feel safe here. And I don't feel safe with this child around him. And then he went on to just give me a speech of like, marriage is hard. And I bet you're doing the right things and he's doing the right things. Hey, my marriage is hard. All marriages are hard. And I was like, I cannot believe this piece of shit in my kitchen is giving me like a therapist, crappy rundown, like instead of protecting me, instead of taking a report and listening to what I'm saying and acknowledging my fears and putting it down. And so the entire report, the entire police incident report was just written up as a marital disagreement, and
Which
yeah.
I want people, first responders. It's on my list. I really want to interview first responders. My husband now was a firefighter for 18 years before he turned pilot. So we have a lot of discussions about first responders and their lack of training. And I think things are getting better. But for me, I think first responders lose sight in why they signed up to do that job. And I think that especially with domestic violence calls, I can understand how that gets really frustrating to get called to the same place over and over again. And I have said this before, I don't understand the paperwork or the logistics of the back end of what that looks like for someone. And I am so sorry that that requires whatever that requires for you. But when my abuser was arrested the last time, even though I had a gash across my nose. My eyes were black. Like, I was physically injured. They did not call an ambulance. I was not evaluated at all. And It took me probably about 6 weeks to feel safe to like leave my house and go to an appointment and get things checked out, which I did. But that was brought up in jury trial later, and I had to justify why I didn't go get medical attention if I was really injured. And I don't believe that the police officers that night were trying to get out of anything. But I do believe that when you get to where you're just going through the motions and you're not really listening to people and you miss things like that, the time that someone does leave, you can be the reason that they go back or the reason why they end up losing their life because you didn't take the report seriously and tried to justify and say, well, marriage is hard. He didn't hit you, though.
Right. Right. And I had an attorney also say that to me as well, because later on, when we went to a temporary custody hearing for my daughter, and she was only 12 months old, that was one of the things that his lawyer said to me. I said on the stand, he threatened to spit in my face. And her response was, well, did he? Did he
The
actually
same
spit?
thing.
And I was like, you people are
Are
monsters.
insane. Well, and
You
this is,
people are, and this was a
yes,
woman saying this to me, and I was like,
that's sick.
this is the most disgusting thing that I've ever been a
I,
part of.
well, and that the same thing happened to me when I went to my divorce hearing. I asked for therapy reintroduction for my children. My children were, I think they were like 15 and 12 maybe when they testified in jury trial with me. And they did not see him in person for a year after that. And then it was like 8 months. So when we went to trial, I said, can we go to therapy reintroduction? They already have therapists. When the therapist says it's fine, then we can do whatever parent time is set. The judge looked at me and told me that I was petty and that I needed to be a better co-parent and that the fear of abuse was not abuse. And I was like, but he was convicted. Like, that happened. And they wouldn't even take his conviction into account because it was the criminal justice system and we were in the family court justice system. So they didn't even take it into account. And I had never been so shocked in my entire life to have someone look at me and say that the fear of abuse is not abuse and that I was being petty to ask for therapy reintroduction. I asked for no property. I asked for no money. I asked for no alimony. I asked for nothing. The only thing I asked for was that. And that was what a judge said to me. And I was shocked. And I hear so many people that have stories like yours, stories like mine, and it makes me sick to my stomach that those are the people that make the decision that affect the rest of our lives. It's not just one day or 1 hour in court. It is the rest of our lives.
It is, and it's the rest of our children's lives. My daughter was so young at the time when we went to court that she was still breastfeeding on demand. And, I sat there and I said everything that was happening. I had proof of a lot of things, but the way that it was twisted, the way that everything was so twisted in the court, the judge treated me like dirt. Opposing counsel treated me like dirt. Later on, when CPS got involved, they were completely useless. At one point, my daughter, had a therapist. She was probably about 4 years old. And my daughter was brave enough to make an outcry of abuse against her birth father. And she said, he threw something at my head and he called me stupid. And he said that she said that both him and his wife were being mean to her. And I thought, this is so incredibly brave of this little girl to be able to say that. And she said it to us. She said it to her therapist. She said it to a babysitter that we had at the time because it was during the pandemic. And therapist, even though she is a mandated reporter, never reported it to CPS.
Same thing happened to my son. And that again, like I really, 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 I don't know if any therapists listen to my show. I really hope some do. But please don't forget why you signed up to do your job. My son reported that his birth father punched him in the chest and it threw him across our family room. He reported it to multiple people. I called DCFS to ask if it had been reported. I had reported it. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. None of that makes any sense, especially when you've never been in the court system or anything. It is not clear. They don't make it easy to figure out either. And so I was so confused when the therapist called me in and was like, I have to report this. And I was like, please report this. How can I help you report this? And I never heard anything about it. There was never any record of it when I called them. And I don't understand how that can happen.
Yeah. It's absolutely insane. It seems like the goal of family court is basically to treat a protective mother A, like she's a liar, B, like she's an alienator, and C, as if she is the only one that needs to be held accountable for her behavior. Because
Yes.
apparently there is very little accountability on fathers. They get the
That-
benefit of the doubt. They can do absolutely nothing while you are married. And I can tell you, my ex husband would not bathe my daughter, barely changed diapers, did not get up in the middle of the night. He actually stopped coming home from work. So, like, any relief that I might have had at the end of the day, for him to even hold her for 5 minutes so I could go to the bathroom or make myself something to eat, he just, no effort, zero effort. He promised me the entire relationship that he would quit smoking because I told him it is dangerous for you to be smoking cigarettes, not just for yourself, but around me while I'm pregnant. And he promised he would quit when I was 30 weeks pregnant. Never quit. Expose that child to second and third degree smoke constantly. And yet, when we went to trial, it really didn't matter. It didn't seem, the only problem it seemed to the judge in the case was that I hadn't been nicer. Well,
Yeah. That
why
you weren't
can't
a
you be
better
nicer?
co-parent.
Right. Why can't you be more nice? Why do I have to be nice?
Yes.
When someone calls me repeatedly a loser and a leech and a broke, terrible mother, when someone questions my choices, when they harass me nonstop, when they bring convicted felons and meth addicts around my child, why do I have to be nice? Since when is that our responsibility as protective mothers to be nice? I've never gained really much in my life from being nice in terms of what people call nice. What they mean is be
Agreed.
quiet. That's what they want. They
Exactly.
want you quiet.
Well,
They want you
and
silenced.
I agree. And I would love to see one of those people put their kids in that situation and just be okay with it. Like, let's just role reverse it. Let's do it. And if you can do it and not say anything about it, I will stop talking. But I don't believe that one person that makes those comments to victims of domestic violence that are trying to protect their children from people that are clearly violent, because I have said it once, if you hit someone that you love in any context, you will hit anyone that you love in any context. And I don't think we should be punished for trying to protect our kids, especially when kids are not given a say in the family court system at all. Even after my children got a guardian ad litem, I think there was only one time that I felt like that actually did anything for them, and that is not how I think it should feel.
Yeah. It's really a shame. It really is. And, we've made so many steps forward over the last several years. I've seen a lot of, better laws passed in certain states to protect children. I've seen some reform, not much, but some reform to the family court, at least regarding reunification therapies and whatnot. But it's it's not nearly enough. We are going forward in some ways and we're going backwards in others. The reason why we have so many young men right now, so many of these kind of, older Gen Alpha and, Gen X guys walking around with these toxic attitudes, why we have, people making documentaries about things like the manosphere is
Yeah.
terrifying. It's borderline
Yeah.
terrifying. And I worry every single day about what kind of adolescence and what kind of adulthood, what kind of a life I'm sending my daughter into because she's about to turn 10. And those years are coming soon where she's going to, she might ask to start, dating, or she might want a boyfriend when she hits high school, or she's going to become maybe interested in boys or girls. And it's really concerning.
It
Um,
scares the crap out of me. I left my abuser when my oldest daughter, like I said, we went to court, I think when she was about 15, and she's 18 now. And it was the scariest thing for me to face ever. And it took me a really long time to figure out how I wanted to face it because I knew all the things that I didn't like about how my mom approached raising me and all the things that I fought back against. And what I came to the conclusion of is when I parent my teenagers, I parent them like I'm trying to convince the teenage version of myself that whatever I'm wanting them to do is a good idea. Because I have not met one person that tells me that their teenage self didn't know everything in the entire world. I knew all the things when I was a teenager. No one could teach me anything. And so I sit there and I think about it. Okay, how could I convince that version of myself that this is a really smart idea? How can I bring this to my teenagers to where they also agree this is a really good idea? On top of that, I started going into high schools with the nonprofit that I work with, and we teach about healthy relationships. And I was really, really honest with her about the things that I overlooked and the things that were clear to me now, but that still did not stop her from meeting one boy that was definitely not the healthiest for her. And that I think was the hardest moment that I have faced as a mom, not stepping in and pointing that out to her because I knew no matter what I said, it wasn't going to be real because she wasn't going to believe that I saw it for what it is. And I am so grateful that she did end that relationship. And she is now with a boy that is incredible and so sweet to her. And I love his parents, and he is so respectful to her. And we have been able to have really honest conversations now about the differences in those relationships. But I even asked her, I said, "What could I have said to you different in your first relationship that would have made you see it?" And she said, "Nothing." And I said, "You're right." And I think even me as an adult in my abusive marriage, there was nothing that someone could have said to make me leave any earlier than I did. And I think teenagers are the same. And so I think the biggest thing is teaching them that, setting a boundary is not disrespectful. And if someone makes you feel like it is, then you should probably evaluate why they think it's disrespectful. And then, I mean, go from there and just, I think, teach them to be confident in themselves. Because I think that was something that I lacked because of my religion and different things. And I met my abuser so young. I think it said in the beginning, you lacked confidence because you were the youngest and your family kind of protected you. And so I think that's one thing that I've noticed is teaching our kids to have accountability and then be really confident in themselves. And I think if we can do those things, then the rest of the things kind of fall into place.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. I want to say we maybe talked, in our email about like one pivotal moment of like when someone gave you just some really terrible advice. And
Hmm.
the moment with the cop telling me that marriage was hard, I think was definitely up there. But I
Yeah.
wanted to share which I wanted to share really quick another moment earlier in my life when I was dating that man who reproductively coerced me, and he was incredibly abusive. That relationship went on for about 5 years. So every time I would get the strength to break up with him, he would somehow kind of worm his way back into my life. And the friend that I had at the time who was dating his brother, so there was one time when I had broken up with him and I was like, this is it. I am done. I've been going through this for 2 or 3 years at this point. I have hit a breaking point. I cannot be with this man any longer. And so I finally said to him, forget I exist. Do not come around me. Don't call me. Don't come to my home. Don't messenger pigeon me. Just leave me alone. And he still tried to reach out to me, but we had successfully been broken up for about 3 months. It was like the longest that I had ever been able to shake him off. And I was like, okay, I am on to like better and brighter things. And one night I went to sleep in my apartment. I was alone because my roommate was in Germany at the time. And that man broke into my apartment, walked into my bedroom, and scared the hell out of me while I was dead asleep. And I had a pit bull at the time, and she was amazing and wonderful. I'm sure many people with pit bulls know they look very scary, but they're kind of like big babies. So the only reason why that dog though did not go nuts was because she knew who he was. She had
Yeah.
seen him for her entire life. So he walks into my bedroom. And when I finally start to get my bearings and wake up, I'm like, what are you doing here? Did you just break into my house? And he's like, oh no, the door was unlocked. Bullshit. The door was not unlocked. And I said, "What are you doing here?" And so in order to kind of just, I was afraid that things were going to escalate and get violent. So I said to him, "Hey, let's just go to sleep and be calm, and then let's talk about this in the morning when I'm fully awake." So he said, "Okay." So we laid down next to each other, went to sleep. In the morning, I woke up. There was a handwritten note on my dining room table, and he was gone. And the note said, amongst a whole lot of other crap, "I just really wanted to watch you sleep." Yeah. And when I called my friend and said, "Look, this is what happened tonight, last night. He broke in here, walked into the bedroom, scared the hell out of me, and then he left this creepy note." She convinced me not to go to the police because she
Stop.
said, yeah, she said that the note sounded kind of sweet and that if I went to the police, that it would destroy his life. Yeah. That is the cop thing was bad. That by far like changed the trajectory of how I saw support for so many years.
Absolutely.
I mean, if I'd say the central theme to my story at like just high level is Lynn was failed. Lynn was failed by so many people. And when
Yeah.
she reached out for help, you guys really dropped the fucking ball. You really
Yeah.
did. You had so many opportunities, so many people out there to help me when I finally reached out, when I needed a hand, and you stepped on it. You kicked the dirt in my face, and so it's almost amazing to me sometimes that I'm where I'm at, in my mid 40s. I'm just like, I sometimes have to look, and it's hard every single day. I'm still working through all this trauma. I'm probably going to be working through it for many years. I have good days and I have bad days, but I'm with a, healthy partner. I'm in a healthy marriage. We have two beautiful kids. He is a wonderful stepfather to my daughter. And for all intents and purposes, that is her father. I mean,
Yeah.
her birth father was not around so much when she was little that my husband taught her, how to read and how to tie her shoes and helped her potty train and all those things that a positive role model should do. And I'm grateful. I really am. I'm grateful every day, and I'm grateful for opportunities like this where I can hopefully appeal to so many victims out there and let them know the warning signs and the little nuanced things that happen, even if you're not being hit, even if you're not being directly spit on. You need to, be aware of these things,
I
and
agree.
that trust your gut. Honestly, I say that all the time. If it feels off, it is probably off.
Mhm. I
Yeah.
think that's really beautiful. I am so proud of all the things that you have overcome, and I appreciate you taking time and just going back into your trauma. I think that that's a really hard thing to do, and I definitely appreciate it because I do think it helps people understand why decisions were made. Because again, I think people who don't go through relationships like that don't really understand because they've not ever been through severe trauma. And so I appreciate you being so vulnerable with that and taking time to talk to me.
Of course, of course.
This was such a good conversation. You are an amazing human, Lynn.